Barbie is pro-men. Yes, I said it. And here's why. Salutations and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kadology and I make videos about everything and anything to do with modern society. So this is going to be quite a chatty video, just some of my thoughts about a film that is taking the world by storm, Barbie. And I wasn't going to actually go and watch this film. I just went on a whim. I was a little bored. I was feeling a little bit lost in life as of late. And so I just decided and happened upon a cinema and went and watched it. I'm going to be honest, it did not blow my mind. It was just a film like any other film. I really didn't see anything or find anything terribly exceptional about it. I think that everything to do with Barbie has really got a lot to do with the name, the heritage, the history, the nostalgia, with the significance of the toy itself, with the significance of the doll, and of course the absolutely phenomenal, exceptional, out of this world marketing and promotion for this film, which has been something that I think Hollywood is going to try and emulate again and again and again with films like this. Additionally, I think everything that Barbie represents as a doll, insofar as beauty standards are concerned, insofar as body positivity is concerned, it resonates with a lot of people in the modern world, and with everything to do with especially the narrative around feminism today, the narrative around women and where we are going. Of course, this film was going to do well. It is perfect for the zeitgeist. Everything to do with the film sort of just comes together like a spider diagram to the center of Barbie. And so I can most definitely understand why it did so well and why it is doing so well, even though as a film in and of itself, it is nothing terribly special. So that's not me saying that this film isn't a great film when you consider everything else aside from the plot, aside from the film itself and its story, its narrative, the script, etc. What I found most interesting was my experience in the cinema. It was very, very strange because this has never happened in a cinema before. When the credits rolled, somebody started clapping. And then suddenly everybody started clapping. I have never experienced anything like that. I don't know if this is just the culture in the north of England where I have just relocated, but I was quite surprised because, as I said, I didn't think it was exactly, an eye-opening film. I mean, I watch Meryl Streep films. I expect a lot. So it was very strange. But then it sort of made sense when I started to reason with why this was happening, why this film spoke to so many, especially young people, especially women. The cinema was noticeably packed with a lot of young women, a lot of Gen Z, millennial women, more so than men. It seemed as if boyfriends had just been dragged along more so than wanting to go and see the film. But it was fascinating to see this sort of act of female camaraderie, clapping together, people clapping as if they'd sort of achieved something. It was like, yes, we've achieved something. We've achieved something with this film. This is a brilliant film. This is great. And it was, at the time, very strange. But I think in terms of everything that we are sold as postmodern consumers, it makes a lot of sense. By the postmodern consumer, I mean that is ultimately what we all are today in the modern world. We are individuals who have replaced spirituality or spiritualism and essentialism with materialism, not just in terms of us consuming things, but even within ourselves and our identities. Our identities are increasingly founded on the material world, on aesthetics, on becoming an aesthetic, on changing our aesthetic and changing our identities continually in order to revitalize ourselves, in order to become a better, newer version of ourselves. We place values in our possessions, in having things, material things that seemingly make us who we are. And in that, we become sort of very fragmented in our own internal identity and psychology because we have an identity or all these different identities that are founded on things that are quite baseless. And I think we can see how terribly that is playing out at the moment with celebrities sort of going through what I like to call a humanization process, the likes of Ariana Grande or Doja Cat, individuals who are not playing into into that sort of parasociality of being a postmodern consumable product, which is ultimately what modern celebrities are. But in terms of Barbie, the Barbie film and all the actors involved and all the people involved have done an exceptional job in playing into the postmodern consumer experience and ultimately presenting it as something political, something revelatory, and something for the people and of the people. And it's intriguing to see. When everybody in the cinema applauded, it felt as if we were trying to create this community of strangers, of people who had just consumed a film, who had just consumed a bucket of popcorn, who just consumed a slushie and a film ticket. And it was very much a temporary high. It wasn't real. It was very synthetic, very artificial. But it is sort of the only thing that is really holding us together, which is quite sad and harrowing to think about. This idea that we are being held together by very finite material things, by products. But aside from all of that and my general feelings about the film, one thing that really did stick out to me in quite an interesting and I would say positive way was how poetically, I think, the Barbie film represented masculinity. The film very interestingly forefronts the dilemmas of the modern man in the various manifestations of Ken. As the counterpart to Barbie since 1961, Ken and Barbie are essentially the inverse of Adam and Eve. Ken's existence is contingent on Barbie, and as such, all his meaning derives directly from her. The film did a very interesting job of presenting Ken in this light, him gaining validation exclusively from Barbie, seeking her validation, her approval, how his day is made when Barbie just oh so looks at him. Her success was his success, and therefore his worth was ultimately reduced to her worth. What the film did very well, and I think very importantly and rather uniquely did, was present Barbie as taking this dynamic for granted. Whilst she takes it for granted, she simultaneously depends on it for her validation. You're only an exceptional person or an exceptional woman if other people look at you and tell you that, if they acknowledge and respect you as being that. You are only a prime minister or a judge or, I don't know, a model if people recognize you as such. Because, of course, meaning is derived from others. One of the most important scenes, in my opinion, was when we see stereotypical Barbie, played by Margot Robbie, choosing, as do all the other variations of Barbie, girls' night every single night over spending the night with Ken. The one thing which gives him significance, being seen as an individual, a worthy individual in the eyes of Barbie, rejects him every single night. And I think this is important in that it shows that Barbie doesn't need Ken to be happy or to enjoy herself. And ultimately, she doesn't need Ken to live. Now, why do I find this important and why do I find this interesting? Young modern men are lost, in my opinion, when it comes to trying to find meaning beyond modern woman, either as something to strive toward or as something to scapegoat. And this is absolutely nothing new. Young men have always depended on woman as a rite of passage into manhood and masculinity, whether it was the young aristocracy traveling to the continent in order to become men, going to brothels or what have you, getting married and producing an heir. And these rites of passage are about garnering a sense of meaning and worth. It is about understanding your masculinity, about competing with other men in pursuit of manhood. The common denominator has always been woman and their integral role in what it means to be and become a man. The Barbie movie shows how stereotypical Ken, played by Ryan Gosling, embodies the young modern man coming to the realization that the young modern woman he garners, and has historically always garnered, his sense of identity from, has no genuine interest in him as a necessary component to her dream life and story. She is a modern woman who is finding and discovering herself in a world where feminine ideals are obsessed over, where beauty is king or queen, where perfection and literally going to the ends of the earth in order to reverse the dreaded reality of aging are at the center of her world. In all of of this and in the journey, the odyssey that Barbie is going through, Ken doesn't feature whatsoever as a central component to that. He doesn't feature in Barbie's story, similarly to how nowadays men as necessity don't readily feature as urgently or meaningfully in the lives of young women. The lives and stories of modern women, specifically younger modern women, are very different from our predecessors. And this is the first time in recorded history that something like this has happened. That's something as sort of revelatory insofar as the autonomy, insofar as the choices, insofar as the education of young women. And I mean not just a small group of women, not just aristocratic women, but all women is concerned. And that is what makes it truly revolutionary. It is as exceptional as Barbie Land. Stereotypical Ken does what a lot of young men have done when faced with the sudden realization that beautiful and young women aren't like the ideal sold to them by the legacies of their fathers, their grandfathers, and of course, Ken turns against that which he feels wronged by. He turns against young and beautiful modern women. I think this realization is very difficult for a lot of men to really grasp and to understand, especially in a world which is no friend to young men. Real modern women are not a monolith. They are not conventionally beautiful. They are all manner and variety of beauty. They are all manner and variety of weight. They are ultimately brains and want to be perceived as brains before they are deemed bodies. And even when they want to be objects, when they want to be objects of desire for men, this is often done in the way of self-objectification or self-sexualization. That is not in the service of men as an end in itself, but as a means to an end, that is, to the end of profit and making money. The most obvious example of this is something I speak about a lot on this channel, namely OnlyFans. Women's self-objectification on the internet has a lot to do with attention, with validation, a lot to do with feeling good in themselves, as opposed to it being about men as an end in themselves. Men are not the goal, they are not the cornerstone, they are not the center of a man's world in that sort of stereotypical idealized way that we see in the media that is portrayed, at least nostalgically, about the past before the dreaded pill entered the market.
To me, it's complete freedom.
And as I said about the modern world not being a friend to young men, I think that in the service economy especially, it is quite clear that feminine qualities, that feminine traits are valued over that of masculine traits. The infiltration of psychology and psychological language into our everyday lexicon and life has most definitely established that talking and talking therapies, compromise, teamwork, sort of togetherness, all these sorts of things that are very feminine in nature are valued and are seen as integral to the modern workplace. Manual labor has left most Western countries. Aggression is demonized in every shape and form. It is deemed entirely toxic. Masculinity is not seen as masculinity beyond being toxic. Even a whisper of a men's rights group or of advocating for the rights and interests of men is immediately shut down. In this, young men don't have an identity or a means for identity, especially in a modern world in which we are a postmodern consumer. We are postmodern consumers who are meant to be garnering a sense of identity continually. And when that is not permitted for half of the modern population, there's going to be a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, and a lot of problems. And I would say that the main way we see this in the West is not in aggression, is not in those very rare instances of young men attacking and being violent toward young women. We mainly see it in, I think, what we see in the manifestation of Ken in the Barbie film. Bored young men, literally just bored. In the same way that most modern men watch explicit content because they're bored, Ken essentially is bored in Barbie land. His entire identity has been stripped away or is just non-existent beyond that of the Barbies. And it is because he is bored that he literally follows Barbie into the real world. Like any young man, he seeks thrills and adventures. He seeks a guru or a leader to guide him away from his boredom or to give some direction to his need for activity and stimulation. Young men today, and young boys especially, are most definitely looking for an escape in something that gives their life purpose and meaning. Who wouldn't want to escape from a world that doesn't value you, that doesn't value what you have to offer, that doesn't value who you intrinsically are? But sadly, there's no explicit content, no pornography, no OnlyFans, no video games, I guess, I don't know, in Barbie land. So what is a guy to do? The answer is very cleverly integrated into the Barbie film, patriarchy. Oh yes, it's the brilliant, perfect crutch for everything. Patriarchy is a fascinating concept, and I'm not talking about patriarchy, the definition, which I mean we all know. I'm talking about it purely as a concept and how it is used. It is used and abused by feminists and has been for decades now. It is used and abused by men in order to create that meaning that they just really need. It is used by men in order to hark back to a time in which men were valued by society, in which everything that men had to offer, from masculinity to their labor, was seen as integral and paramount. Of course, in saying that we are harking back to the past, it means we are harking back to nostalgia, which isn't actually in any way real, but does offer hope or a sort of faith in what human beings can be, because we allegedly were that. And Ken's discovery of patriarchy gives him two opportunities. It's like killing two birds with one stone for him. And I would say it does the same for young men today. Firstly, it gives the Kens an opportunity to turn against that which represents the greatest threat to their very insular understanding of masculinity: the Barbies. Just like the concept of patriarchy gives young men the opportunity to turn against that which represents the greatest threat to their very insular idea and understanding of masculinity: modern woman. And secondly, it allows Ken to infuse this idea of Barbie as enemy with a pseudo-spiritual element and justification. And the same most definitely applies to young men who use the patriarchy or the concept of patriarchy to infuse their sort of woman as enemy with a pseudo-spiritual meaning. It isn't that the Kens or red-pilled men hate and despise women per se. They just have exclusive knowledge and understanding of what is best for men, and therefore by default what is best for women and society at large. As Andrew Tate said in his most recent interview with Candace Owens,
I don't think that any of the things that are happening to the male population are accidental. I think that keeping us as docile as possible is very interesting for the people who are in charge of the world, because we're the warrior class. At the end of the day, it's going to boil down to the men who are going to stand up and actually do something about anything at some point in time.
And that is precisely what stereotypical Ken does. He stands up and he actually does something. But what I believe the Kens and young men get abysmally wrong is their obsession in deriving meaning, in deriving their sense of masculinity from their enemy. Patriarchy only makes sense with women, and a warrior class only makes sense if it's doing what warriors do: conquering an enemy, destroying an enemy, and controlling an enemy. And that is where the story ends for both patriarchal Kens and for the manosphere. The manosphere has absolutely nothing of value to say to young men when it comes to that inevitable time when they leave the sexual marketplace. That is, for the vast majority of their life, figuring things out out and existing beyond their sexual market value. Likewise, the Kens have absolutely no idea about anything that doesn't have anything to do with horses, mink coats, and, well, just lounging around with the Barbies. It is all in all a fantastical masculinity, a complete ideal and fabrication that isn't actually masculinity. It is a convenient and temporary distraction from the realities of how hard, complicated, and unpredictable life is. The important thing about control over women is that it permits the controller a false sense of agency that isn't actually genuine agency. Control over another is not true freedom, as Simone de Beauvoir would have said in her Ethics of Ambiguity. In fact, I'd highly recommend that anybody reads the Ethics of Ambiguity because it is an exceptional little book. To have control over another human being isn't true freedom. It isn't true agency. True freedom is found within you. Now, the Barbie movie did something that the manosphere has not been able to do. And that is why I think that this film is pro-men, and rightly so. The Barbie film doesn't tell men what they want to hear. It tells them what they need to hear. Stereotypical Ken is forced to reckon with his insecurities, with his projections, and with his lack of truly knowing who he is or wants to be. He's obliged to do this because he isn't truly fulfilled or fueled with purpose in the patriarchy. There are only so many horses that can fill the void before they are sucked into it.
Johnny gets a feeling he's been surrounded by horses, 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 horses.
What is of the utmost importance is that Ken accepts that he is probably not going to find himself. He's probably not going to know who he is in the short term. That this is something that is going to take him a very long time, if not a lifetime, as it ought to for everybody. Your identity is a lifelong endeavor. It is not an aesthetic. It is not a temporary thing. It is not something that you discover at a particular age. It is riddled with more wobbles, with more downs than ups, with unimaginable and unpredictable changes and alterations. It is far more difficult, far more complicated, far more grueling than the easy way out in either simping after or having control over Barbie or a modern woman. By the end of the film, all the Kens are acknowledged as Kens whose existence and purpose has been contingent on the Barbies and their world. Barbie Land ignored the Kens as individuals in their own right up until the final scene. And this is something which political feminism has done to men since the 1970s. Political feminism sees men as a monolith. It sees men as purely that which is everything that women have been known to and have been conditioned to fear. Men are the enemy. They are that which has to be controlled, subjugated, ignored. By the end of the film, Barbie acknowledges Ken, his feelings, and his individuality for the first time. She hears his struggles without condescension, without disdain or ridicule. She apologizes for taking him for granted, for refusing to acknowledge his humanity fully and truly. But what I found the most important and the most crucial was that Barbie does not and will not save Ken. She will not be Ken's Eve, either in saving him or being blamed for his damnation. In this, he will have to find his own way to his identity. He will have to find his own masculinity without her, without Barbie, without modern woman. And when I've said this, I have been taken out of context. It has been a bit misconstrued as me saying that men need to go their own way. No, men going their own way is completely and is all about woman. Men going their own way is the ultimate extreme example of men seeing woman as the enemy. It is the same same as political feminists who are political lesbians, because ultimately their entire existence revolves around their enemy. It revolves around that friend-enemy distinction. Women are friends, men are enemies, and in this, it's the most extreme form of an enemy. And in that, I do believe that your enemy is ultimately the essence of your entire existence and life if you are making such extreme choices based on them. If your enemy forces you, or at least you perceive your enemy as forcing you to make such an extreme decision, you really have no control or agency over yourself whatsoever. This isn't a happy ending for the Kens, but it is an important and a very real ending for them. It is the ending that the Kens, and I believe young men today, really, really need. There is no past to yearn for, nor is there any woman who is obliged and expected by patriarchal norms to save men from themselves and the world. I would say that young people generally lack the insights of philosophy books, the use and encouragement of their own cultivated critical thinking, and an education that isn't stuck in the stalemate of the industrial era and its marketable demands. Men are noticeably suffering dearly, and it is because of this that the likes of gurus, of experts, of earthly gods really appeal to them and direct and guide them, often into very dark and very counterproductive places. Many young men have realized that young women are not going to save them, and so they look for other people to save them. They look for the likes of Andrew Tate to save them, or at least a while ago they would look for Jordan Peterson to save them. Unfortunately, although in my opinion, fortunately, you are the only one who can save yourself. You are the only one who can put your life into such a position that you can garner meaning from yourself and your efforts, insofar as your efforts in creating and building relationships with other people are concerned. And in that, you are essentially the only one who can give your life meaning, and who can give your life and ensure that your life has meaning for the long term and not just temporarily. And that is a very difficult and very scary thing to come to terms with. It is the ultimate existentialist plight, that realization that nobody is going to save you, that there is nobody but you. As Nietzsche, the main culprit of this mess, wrote rather ambiguously, albeit rather infamously, God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatest of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? Barbie is pro-men because, in my opinion, it appreciates and understands the plight without coddling the sufferer. Our society most definitely needs to empathize with and understand men in a way that it has not done. But it also needs to inject a kind of philosophy that is sorely lacking. The questions, the conversations, the meanings and the dilemmas that it reckons with, the everyday life experiences that we are all united in just going through the human condition. And this needs to inform an expanded idea of masculinity that is not something to be feared or something to be limited and suppressed, but something to be proud of, something to promote, something to really have pride in, something to really believe in and have faith in. A masculinity that isn't universal, because there is absolutely no universal masculinity, similarly to how there is absolutely no universal femininity, but a masculinity that is at its core you and your design. And that's what I took away from the Barbie film. Even though I said it wasn't a terribly exceptional film, I think it had a very, very exceptional message at its core, and I appreciated that greatly. If you haven't watched the film, I do highly recommend that you go and watch it. Knock yourself out, take a bucket of popcorn and enjoy the experience. It's an interesting film, really is. but definitely not my favorite. But yeah, I've got nothing else to really say about that. Thank you so much for watching whatever this video was. Somebody said that they really wanted me to speak about the Barbie film and what it meant to me. And yes, this is just my takeaway from it. I haven't watched anybody else's reviews about the Barbie film. I don't know if anybody else has said this or what they are saying about this, but I would be very, very interested to read your thoughts down below in the comment section. Please do like and please do subscribe. I am trying to reach 150k subscribers by the end of the year. The algorithm is and has not been my friend this year, so it would be great if we could turn things around. Thank you as always to my very generous patrons, and thank you to you for your time and for giving me the time of day. And I'll see all of you very, very soon in the next one.
Hey, listen up, I've tried to tell you this 100 times. Not getting better by lying there pretending to cry. You on repeat, you can see shit cause you have closed your eyes. You say you listen, but you're missing what it's all about. Rise up now. If you never fall, you don't change at all. Cry out now. Have you given up? I will never stop, yeah. I try to help you, but you keep reading between the lines. There's nothing there for you to complicate, we're not aligned. You say you listen, but guessing that's just another sign. Not growing up, you're growing old, your life keep passing by.